You mentioned URC Best League there, so why don't we jump into that then and talk about things that make us happy?
Beautiful segue.
So I'll go first this week because you went first last week. So Welsh regions. So I was at the derby between Cardiff and Scarlets, played in Parc y Scarlets. Scarlets came out with a win that I think we badly needed, because I think if we hadn't have won this, it would have really looked like we'd have been wondering where our next win is coming from. I like to jump into the stats and things, and I did a deeper dive on the Scarlets pod, but I feel like the prediction that I made before the game was that I looked at the two team sheets, and Scarlets had Gareth Davis and Verfa Fita back in the team. And I looked at it and I thought, those two are head and shoulders better than any other player on either side. So they should be enough for us to win it. And that proved to be the case. So Fafita made the most meters of any Scarlets player. Gareth Davis got a try and 2 try assists and ran the game. He was on for the full 80. Fafita also was big in the line out for us, was our biggest line out taker. So it kind of came true that the difference between the two sides was those two players. That the underlying numbers for the Scarlets, if you look on the stats, depending on which stats website you use, which is something I'll talk about on Twitter tomorrow, the Scarlets still had some underlying issues which are still present from the previous games, like speed of ball from the ruck, things like that, where if you look at the stats, Cardiff had the better of the game in some areas. It's one of those things where the stats can lie, because I was in the stadium watching the game, and in the second half, the Scarlets were the only team in it for most of it, to be honest. And there was a bit of niggle around the scrums as well, where Cardiff were getting really rewarded in the scrums, but it's debatable. Some people didn't like the referee's interpretation. I'm a Scarlets fan, so I have my incredibly biased opinion on that. And I think I'm right, but there you go. So, yeah, like I said, important win for the Scarlets. I don't think it's the end of the world for Cardiff. And yeah, the Lions next up for the Scarlets at home. Lions will talk about a little bit more in a bit about that match with Benetton, but that is not an easy game, as the table suggests. So yeah, they're just happy to get 5 points on the board, really, and it's a bit of a monkey off the back of the team. So I think the question now is, for Dwayne Peel, the head coach, he's going to have a load of Welsh players back available. Sadly, Sam Costello is now out, which is a big shame. But will Dwayne be able to resist the urge of throwing all of the Scarlets internationals back into the team and kind of taking away the momentum that some of the young kids have got now who have been playing? Like, we've got 21, 22, 23-year-olds in the team. And I think to rip them out of the team at this point now isn't necessarily going to do anyone any favors. Anyway, speaking of teams that are going to get their internationals back, apparently one team who is going to play their internationals again will be the Ospreys. So they were in London. So our first ever podcast was reacting to the news that the Ospreys were going to play this match in London. That happened on Friday. They beat the Sharks. I think it was 20 points to 5. I can't remember. Check in the background for me, will you? It's it scored 3 tries to 1. The Sharks scored first, but then it was offensive masterclass from the Ospreys. They kind of scored their 3 tries a bit by accident, which I had a bit of fun poking at some Ospreys fans on Twitter, where one try where they were down in the Sharks on their try line a couple of times, and they just couldn't find a way over. And then Owen Williams throws a bad pass to Walsh, which the defender overreads, and then Walsh, all he has to do is flop over the line. And then another try was a charge down kick that Max Nagy picked up and ran the length. And then the final try that they scored was Kieran Williams grounding a try that a Sharks player failed to ground over his try line that bubbled free, and he just tapped it down. So Ospreys still not the best attacking team to watch in the world, but I still stand by what my prediction was of they will be the strongest Welsh team this year, and they've already started getting multiple points on the board. So for me, they're performing as they should. Sharks, not a great start to the season, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think they're winless so far, but they have been on tour. So, and we know South African teams can vary a bit on tour, and obviously they've not had all their big stars back. So there is that kind of context to give to it. And then there's the Dragons, who, I won't lie, this was on at the same time as Scarlet's Cardiff, and I wasn't in a rush to look up the highlights of this one. It was quite a predictable scoreline. It was respectable at half time, 17 points to 7. And apparently the Dragons' 2 tries were good, and apparently they did have some bright spells in the game. But, it's Dragons away at Munster. It went as you would expect. From a Dragons point of view, they obviously were missing a lot of forwards. Their backline, I actually thought, was pretty close to their first choice backline. They moved Steph Hughes to inside centre, which I think is his best position, and probably they were Rio Dyer away and maybe a fullback here or there away from their best team, although they had Angus O'Brien at fullback, and I think that's his best position. But apart from that, it was pretty as expected. I'm sure from the Irish point of view, mate, Munster would have got what they expected out of that game.
Yeah, it was a much improved performance compared to their last outing against Benetton. On the negative side, though, it looks like Carbery's picked up yet another injury, so there's a bit of a problem there for Munster at 10. So I read today that Carbery's going to be out for a couple of months, which is a massive setback for him, because we all know his story from last season, how he's bounced back at the beginning of the season. So yeah, I think they might be in a bit of trouble there at 10. It'd be interesting to see if they have to get in cover or not. But yeah, that was definitely one of the negatives. But look, they got back to winning ways. Can't speak about this match and not mention Calvin Nash. He was absolutely excellent. He's been good now for a couple of seasons. Like he's really finding good form as well this season. It looks like Snyman as well has picked up an injury.
He's had surgery after the World Cup. So I think it was one of those cases where he was putting it off until after the World Cup, and apparently now he's going to be off for a while.
Yeah. So that's really, so those two guys out, and there's obviously a rumor floating around as well that Jean Klein may be recruited to I know Kalon's defended this, and he's saying that it's like he's been offered a good contract by Munster, but yeah, he's been touted that he's potentially leaving Munster at the end of this current season and going to the top 14. So it'll be interesting to see, because he's obviously now an NIQ and non-Irish qualified player. So it'll be interesting to see if Munster can hold on to him. I think he will be a massive loss. But look, let's not get too negative. I think it was a good Munster performance. I love when they play in Cork in Musgrave Park. They always seem to get a really good crowd in. So I think that was a good positive. And look, they're playing an exciting brand. Like they seem to of rugby, that they seem to have picked up where they left off last season. So yeah, I think Munster are on track to have a good season. And let's move on then to the other kind of big game. The big game of the weekend for me really was Connacht the Ulster. That was, I think it was 7:35 kickoff on Saturday evening. And yeah, it looks like Connacht are the only team now with 3 wins from 3 games. They're sitting top of the URC, which is a lovely sight for me.
For audio listeners, Caelan is not Caelan, sorry mate, and Enda is smiling his head off so much so that I'm worried his head is going to fold in on itself.
Well, this might be the only time I get to smile like this, so I'll enjoy it while it lasts. But I'll have to say, Connacht were kind of, they didn't play well for about 55 minutes. At one stage, they were 17 points to 3 down. But fair play to them, they came back and they put in a strong last 30 minutes, last 25 minutes, which is really promising. And before this game, I did watch the quarterfinals. So let's not forget, like last season, Connacht knocked Ulster out in the quarterfinals up in Ravenhill, which was a massive result. And the way Connacht won that game was at the breakdown, the amount of turnovers. That's when I think, Seamus Hurley-Langton really made a name for himself. He won so many turnovers. Conor Oliver was brilliant in that game. And then I think that was, like, it was interesting listening to the Ulster coach, Dan McFarlane, before this game, saying that was definitely an area that they lost against Connacht. That was an area they were going to target in this game, and that's exactly what unfolded. Ulster were definitely on top at the breakdown, especially for that first half. They won numerous turnovers. Connacht, with a couple of sloppy plays, they didn't hold on to the ball that well. But a lot of that was down to a really strong Ulster defence, and they dominated that breakdown. And unfortunately, Seamus Hurley-Langton, he went off after about a minute or two. with a head knock. Thankfully, he looks okay. He seems to be passing all the tests since then. So I think his his lack of presence was missed, and not just in terms of winning turnovers, but in terms of Connacht retaining the ball, and also he's a really strong ball carrier. So yeah, look, it was good to see Connacht come back. First start for Jack Carty. He had a
saw that.
pretty okay game. Yeah, like he smashed.
So
Nailed
JJ's
the
out,
kick.
isn't he?
Yeah, it looks like that injury isn't too serious though. So it'll be interesting to see when they're both fit who starts. I know for the opening game of the season they were both fit, and JJ got the nod, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. But Cartier overall, he had a decent game. He did miss a very, very kickable kick towards the end that could have cost them. But then I don't know if you saw the clip, he absolutely made up for it and kicked a beautiful crossfield kick to win it really. So I think he overall had a decent game. And yeah, I can't watch Connacht games and review them without just giving praise again for the centres. I know you're probably sick of hearing me, but Cathal Ford, this young guy, scored again. He was absolutely brilliant. And Tom Farrell next to him, again, for me, he's one of their standout players. He had a great game. Blade, as usual, had a really strong game, some lovely breaks. It did pick up an injury, but it looks like it isn't too serious. And one thing I just want to highlight as well, Connacht's line out is really good. They're winning a lot of their own ball and they're disrupting so much ball. Like they're just really enjoyable to watch. And finally, one thing I would like to say is, I don't know if you mightn't have heard this, but Sexton's brother is involved.
I heard the comms say that the Sexton name, and I assumed it was just a coincidence.
Yeah, it's Sexton's brother, Mark Sexton, and he's the assistant attack coach.
Right.
So if you look at Connacht's attack, it is really exciting. They do run some really nice lines. They play tight. They play wide. So yeah, it's just an interesting kind of like I hadn't heard much about him at all. I don't think many people had. But he's been given a lot of praise for Connacht's attack so far, this season. So yeah, definitely a name to keep an eye out for, certainly.
Just quickly on Rugby Brothers, Sam Warburton has got an identical twin who was a physio at Cardiff. So Sam was playing for Cardiff, and his twin brother Ben would come on and treat him. And so people would be like, "I'm seeing double here, man. What's happening?" But Ben is now a physio at the Scarlets, so I think there's a lot of double takes happening going on for us.
But yeah, so yeah, Connacht, 3 from 3. So we'll see. They've got a couple of tough fixtures now. They're going to be away from home for a couple of weeks. They've got Edinburgh away this coming weekend. So that should be a really good test to see where they're really at. Leinster,
just on Ulster before we leave. So I was watching the highlights of it, and I couldn't help but notice how young that Ulster team looked. Since it looks like kids in some of the positions. Like I think their 10 looks about 15 years old. Is it a new team for them? Or are they dealing with something?
Yeah, I suppose I should have added that context. Like they did have literally 20 players unavailable for this game. And listening to Dan McFarland speak before and after the game, he did say that they were always going to rotate for this game. Like Dave Shanahan at scrum half, that was his first start at scrum half since 2021, which is a bit of a mad stat. But they do have a 6-day turnaround. They've got Munster at home in Ravenhill on Friday. That's looking like a sellout, by the way. So obviously there are a couple of factors there. But no, that 10, he is young, but he's actually a Munster player. He's a former Munster player, Jake Flannery. He's still in his early 20s. To be honest, he probably would have been man of the match if Connacht hadn't come back. He played really well. And he spoke, I listened to an interview that he did after the game as well. He spoke very well and he was very honest. Like he did make a mistake. Like Cathal Ford did run in. Like he ran a nice line off a line out, but he probably shouldn't have ran in so easy. And Flannery was very open about that after the game and saying he should have had that. But yeah, he's actually a former Munster player. Billy Burns was on the bench. He did come on for a bit.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's it. 20 players unavailable, and they were always going to rotate.
Yeah.
But Ulster were, I don't want to take that away. Like Ulster were excellent as well. And again, they absolutely dominated that breakdown for about 50 minutes.
Yeah, it seems to be a thing because the Dragons put out a story the other day as well about having 20 players unavailable, whether that was through Wales call-ups or injuries and things. And the Scarlets have an annual story that comes out about having 20 players unavailable. I don't think Cardiff Rugby currently employ 20 players. So is this I wonder if this is like a meeting of storms here, where you've got players coming back from the World Cup. They're either picked up a knock and they were carrying a knock through that, or they were putting off a surgery in order to play in it, or you got the players who stayed at the clubs and then they had a really long preseason, a really long break between games, and then not proper warm-up games, and then straight into the season. I wonder if those two things are just leading to injuries galore all over the place.
Yeah, I think you could be right, and like I haven't seen enough of the stats to suggest, otherwise. It could like with all these things, it's just bad luck as well, isn't it? I saw a really interesting tweet a while ago though. It might have been Progressive Rugby tweeted, like Harlequins have obviously, I think it's well known now, they do very, very little contact training. And their injuries have plummeted. Like they've so many more, especially last season, they had so many more players available for longer because there were less injuries. So like I'm sure there are so many different factors in that. They talk about, those 4G pitches being bad for injuries.
Yeah, so
I think the
who's just
jury's
had a
still out.
4G? Who's just had a 4G put in? Is it you guys?
Ulster. Well, then you're
Oh,
looking at Connacht though, and Connacht have that, and like now Connacht do have some injuries, but nothing near like what Ulster's list is like at the moment. So like I think you'd have to do a lot more research into those what we call them plastic pitches to see
yeah, because they're
if
quite
they are.
common.
Yeah, but I have heard one of the studies is there are less injuries, but of the injuries that do occur, they are more serious.
So it's
That's
like
definitely one of the studies that I heard. Yeah.
it's like knees and
But I think
ankles. Like when people land or twist, the boot gets caught a bit more easily or something.
yeah, and I was listening to Dobson as well before the Stormers game against Glasgow, and he said that they really like it was their first time, I think, for a lot of those players even playing on a 4G pitch, and they really learned a lesson against Glasgow. Like they were not used to that pitch, and like Dobson said, one of the reasons they lost by so many points was because they were not used to that fast track. And yeah, exactly. In terms of how just you connect with the ground, it sounds really strange, but yeah, there's a lot more give and grass and everything. So yeah, it's an interesting talking point. I'm sure we can discuss it on a later pod, but yeah, I think we definitely more research needed there. But yeah, so many teams, especially top 14 teams as well, are getting these pitches in. But yeah, and it's an interesting area for sure.
What about Leinster then? I cut you off in your prime there.
Yeah, look, they got back to winning ways. On paper, like I was a bit nervous with my predictor league. Like I did have them Leinster down to win, but I was a bit nervous. But then after about 15, 20 minutes, I wasn't. Like on paper, for me, that Edinburgh team was better than Leinster's team. They should have done better. And they just simply didn't. Leinster just the conveyor belt just keeps, spitting out these unbelievable talents. And they just played really well. I think Edinburgh, yeah, were just not there for me. I don't know
So they had
if
Kinghorn playing.
they did. Like they had a very strong team out, which was frustrating. And they'd Ben Healy at 10, former Munster player. But they weren't there for me. The confidence wasn't there. And it was, business as usual for Leinster.
Stat for you on Ben Healy: he has kicked 1.009 kilometers in 3 games. That's his total kick distance. He is obviously top in the URC stats for that. And that kind of, we knew he had a long boot, but like I think he's gonna take the mick this season with how far he's gonna kick.
Because obviously, like there's a lot of change in Leinster. We discussed this in our last pod. So, and they did lose their opening game, but it does feel like they're finding their groove again. And obviously, they've got Nina Barrett to come in now, and who knows.
That's a good opportunity to jump to our listeners' questions. So, well, no, we'll jump to this particular one. We'll come back to the rest of them later. So a question from Miles on Twitter. So we tweeted out before the show any questions for us. And guys, if you want to leave a comment below asking us a question, we'll bookmark it for ourselves and then answer it in the next show. If you want to DM us on Twitter, or I don't know, come and find me and tell me to my face, I suppose that's okay as well. So question from Miles: will Will Jacques hit the ground running at Leinster, and will they continue to dominate with him at the helm?
Who knows? Like, for me, like everything you hear about him is that he's absolutely excellent. But you know, like I don't know if you saw that image from the Springboks coaching ticket basically during the World Cup final, and all of the coaches are looking at Razzie, and you can see Razzie's making all those calls, and obviously it's
Yeah,
been announced now that Razzie's going to take over the head coach role for the Springboks. So
I don't think
I
he ever
wonder,
wasn't. I
yeah.
think
So was it just a Razzie show the whole time? And like I know Nina Bar, when he was involved with Munster, he was involved with the defense, and he got high praise for that. So I think he'd be an excellent fit. I think he's a like I'd say they paid some big bucks to get him in, and it could be what Leinster need, because they they have a good defense, but do they need to take to that next level and have somebody like that come in? Like everybody was singing Stuart Lancaster's praises, but ultimately they didn't make it last season, did they? They didn't get over the line against La Rochelle. And maybe it's the defense. Maybe that's the area they really need to focus on. And if it is, then Niederbayr is your guy, I think. And obviously he's got built all this experience now, and he does have strong connections, obviously South Africa. So will we see some potentially South African players come over to Leinster? Like that's a real possibility. Like we've heard this week that Michael Alaltoa, the Samoan international, is leaving allegedly next season to top 14. Like he's going to be a big loss. Will we see a South African come in here? That'd be interesting to see. But I think he'd be a good fit. I really do. And from all accounts, from what you hear about Leo Cullen, he's really good at stepping back and letting somebody come in. And like
so. Is,
it's not the
is
Leo show.
Cullen
He's happy.
is Cullen going upstairs or something?
So the way it worked with Stuart Lancaster was that Lancaster ran all of the training, and I think he did most of the attack and everything. But Leo kind of he did all the media work. He did a lot of work with the forwards, and apparently he had a massive say on selection as well. So I assume it's going to be the same.
Yeah,
So I think Niederbayr will be senior coach. I think that was the title previous anyway,
because
senior coach.
I
And
was
then
looking
Leo
up.
Cullen is head coach.
Okay, I was
So
looking up how Leinster set up their coaching ticket, and it's interesting. They don't say like forwards coach, backs coach, or something. They just have Leo Cullen, and then they have assistant coaches, and then they have someone like Sean O'Brien, who is a specific coach for a specific area. But like Robin McBride, who was, I think, forwards coach for Wales, he's just down as an assistant coach, and you would assume that he is the forwards coach, but that's not his official title. It's just assistant. So it's interesting that Leinster doing it different, and I think bringing in this new person from outside is new ideas is always good. You've got to keep it fresh. And you are
yeah,
right that there are things that Leinster could improve on. Or having said that, with some of the retirements that they've had and with this new coach coming in, I do expect there to be a bit of a storming period where they have to figure it all out again, and then they'll come back. So maybe they might have, you say a down season with Leinster as them like finishing third or something, but they might drop down from their peak a little bit for a while, and then I think they'll be back at it.
yeah, because they have the talent. It just might take Jack that time to enforce his views or whatnot, or to get his style of play across, or his message or whatnot. But yeah, it's I think it's a really smart move by Leinster. It really is. Talk about a high profile coach.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'd be really interesting to watch Leinster this season. And that probably runs it up for the Irish team, certainly. But I know that you were watching, like, what other games this weekend stood out for you in terms of URC? I know I watched the Lions v Benetton game in Treviso. You caught that game as well, didn't you?
I caught the
What
second
was your
half
take?
of that, and I think the second half was the best bit of it to catch. A low scoring game, 15 points to 10, but it looked like a really intense game. Everyone's so excited about Benetton this season. I think Fekitoa got his
Yeah,
first try for them,
he did. Yeah,
and yeah, really a team to watch. They've got the checkbook out, and it's great to see them getting results with it as well. But it was all about the final play in this game, wasn't it? It was all about that. I likened it to the All Blacks versus Ireland in the quarterfinal of it just kept going and going and going and going well into the red, and Lions managed to force their way from deep within their own 22 up until Benetton half, only for Lamoureux, the Italian captain, to step in and turn the ball over. So it was a great finish and a really high quality bit of play, wouldn't you say, mate?
Yeah, and like the Lions have been thereabouts in every game. Like I know we're only 3 games into the season, but I think before this game they're average like they're losing by less than a score. Like they're really in there and they're not a bad side at all. And let's not forget, like they're playing away from home. I think they'll finish mid-table probably. They're not a bad team. They've got some really good players, especially Marius Lowe in the center. He is a fabulous player. But yeah, Benetton and the game as well was just seeing the crowd. Like Benetton, I
It
liked
was a good
again. I
crowd,
know
wasn't it?
yeah, I know we spoke about the Scarlets stadium. Like I think Benetton have done it really well as well. They don't play in a massive stadium. They play in like a purpose-built rugby stadium that has 2 decent stands, and they seem to get a good atmosphere. So I thought that was really positive as well. So obviously, the Treviso crowd are getting behind them, which I think is really good for the league, especially when we discussed about a bit of a drop off in interest in rugby because everyone's rugbyed out after the World Cup. It is great to see a team like Benetton bring in all those superstars and also actually get a decent crowd in as well. But yeah, it was a brilliant game. And I forget who scored the winning try, not the winning try, sorry, but the try that got the Lions really back into it. He was the substitute
The
prop.
replacement tight heads, yeah.
Yeah, he is a big boy. I'd really like to see him play. I think he's in his early 20s.
Is
The
he? I assumed he
commentators
was like
said
36.
he's in his early 20s, and the commentator said he was 158 kgs. Now I did look up the official stats. He's down as 153. He's a big lad.
That's still
I feel
big.
that's still big. But like their scrum. See what the reason I think they're going to do well this season is that they have a solid set piece. Which I think is so important. Like I don't want to get too cliched, and I know you did your thread on, everyone thinks the Springboks are just massive forwards, and we know they're not. But traditionally Springboks teams and South African teams have good set piece, right? And that's certainly the case with the Lions. And I think that's why they are where they are, and that they're hanging in those games, and they will get some good victories this season. And it's because they have a really strong set piece.
Yeah, definitely. They're South African compatriots were in Zebra as well, or Parma, I should say, as the Bulls beat Zebra. I think it ended 54-29, but with 10 minutes to go, it was 29-35, and Zebra had really come back into the game. So Zebra got a try bonus point in this game. Bulls, I've been tipping the Bulls to be amazing all this season, and they did pull away in the last 10 minutes with 3 tries. Kind of the floodgates opened when I think Zebra realised that they had nothing left to play for. But yeah, again, Zebra, there's a lot of people in Wales really worried about Zebra this season of like, oh, we might lose to these because they look exciting. They're scoring tries. And yes, they're letting some in, but eventually they will win a few games. I absolutely do not think that they will go the season winless at all.
Yeah, they're going to have a big scalp this season, I think. And yeah, I didn't tip the Bulls to put that highest score up on them. But I think the Bulls, when you look at that Bulls team, especially that back row, it's not surprising that they had that big of a win. But I think it's good for them because they were underwhelming last season. I don't want to move on without mentioning that Lions player. I feel bad. But his name is Ata Bakanye, and he's 24 years old.
My goodness.
But like he is going to be a great
That
player.
is a lot of cake to eat in 24 years.
Yeah, so he is. I think he's going to be like he's really good in the scrum, and he makes some big tackles. I really like this player. And they obviously the Lions, they Carlo Sadi, was it 2 seasons ago? Then he went to the Sharks, and now he's playing in the top 14. So it looks like he's a decent backup there as well, which is good to see. And yeah, good to see young talent coming through there. I think that probably wraps up our URC review.
Just Glasgow Stormers was the only one. I think it finished 20 points to 9. It looks like an exciting game. Glasgow, again, like Edinburgh, playing their Scotland stars. Again, Tuipulotu got a nice first phase try. Stormers went down to 13 at one point. There was a bit of argy-bargy. South Africans don't seem to be travelling well this season. I think it's 1 win in 8 away games they've had so far this year cumulatively. So maybe a bit of hope for the rest of us, because I don't see many of us going down there and getting a result.
Yeah.
Anyway, should we do some more listeners' questions?